A humble elderly woman travels from the countryside to her son's mansion, carrying a blue dress sewn with love. Received with disdain by her daughter-in-law, she is silenced and hidden away like a burden. But on the day of the party, her unexpected appearance reveals a truth that changes everything. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Now, on with the story. The Greyhound bus hissed to a stop in front of the wrought iron gate. Its golden embellishments gleamed under the afternoon sun, a stark contrast to the simple woman who stepped off, carrying a worn-out fiberboard suitcase tied with twine and a cloth tote bag. Helen, at 72, had trembling hands, not from the weight of her luggage but from the emotion that had been squeezing her chest for months. 3 years, 3 long years since, she had last seen Richard, back when he still lived in the modest 2-story house on Maple Avenue. Before everything changed, before the company took off, before the wedding to Isabella, before he became a man she barely recognized in the rare, increasingly brief phone calls. The gate guard, a young man in a crisp uniform, watched her suspiciously through the bulletproof window. Helen approached with careful steps, her faux leather shoes scuffing against the marble pavement. "Good afternoon, I'm Richard's mother, Helen," she said, trying to hide the nervousness in her voice. The young man scanned her from head to toe, his eyes lingering on her simple clothes, her grey hair pulled back in an unpretentious bun, the patched-up suitcase. "I don't have any visitors scheduled. Sir didn't mention anything to me." "He doesn't know I'm coming today," Helen explained, adjusting the strap of her tote bag on her shoulder. "I wanted to surprise him. I brought some cinnamon rolls he used to love as a kid, and—" her voice caught slightly. "I brought a special gift." After a long call on the intercom and several suspicious glances, the guard finally opened the gate, but not before instructing her to use the side entrance, far from the main white marble entryway she had admired through the bars. The walk through the garden revealed a property that surpassed all her most ambitious dreams for her son's future. Perfectly pruned rose bushes, a fountain with sculpted cherubs in the center, a lawn as green as a carpet. Helen smiled, proud. Richard had achieved all of this through his own hard work. A tall, elegant woman was waiting at the service entrance. Isabella had blonde hair styled in perfect waves, wore a light pink tailored pantsuit, and her cold blue eyes analyzed Helen as if she were appraising a worthless object. The smile she offered didn't reach her eyes. "Helen, what a surprise," Isabella said, extending a hand in a perfunctory gesture. Her fingers remained stiff during the handshake. "Richard is in a very important meeting. Urgent company business, you understand." Helen nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. She had imagined their reunion differently, with warm hugs and tears of joy. She took a package wrapped in brown paper from her tote bag. "I brought fresh cinnamon rolls. They came out of the oven this morning, and this," she said, revealing a carefully folded blue fabric, "is a dress I sewed for you for your wedding." The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella looked at the gifts with an expression that shifted between embarrassment and disdain. She lightly touched the blue fabric with her fingertips, as if it might contaminate her. "How quaint," she murmured, the word sounding like a disguised insult. "But we got married 2 years ago. It was an intimate ceremony. Just close family, you know." The word intimate echoed in Helen's mind like a slap. Close family. She hadn't been invited to her own son's wedding. "I didn't." "No," she whispered, clutching the dress to her chest. "Richard never told me about—" "Oh, but of course he did," Isabella interrupted with a crystalline fake laugh. "You must have forgotten. Memory plays tricks on us sometimes, doesn't it? Especially at our age." Our age. Helen was 72. Isabella looked 35 at most. A middle-aged Hispanic housekeeper appeared silently, observing the scene with attentive eyes. Isabella gestured impatiently toward her. "Rosa, take Helen to wait in the staff break room. Make her some coffee and make sure she isn't disturbed by anyone. Richard should be home in a few hours." These few hours, as if she were a scheduled business appointment. Rosa nodded respectfully and led Helen through narrow hallways, away from the main areas of the house. The break room was small, with simple furniture and a window overlooking the back of the property. Helen sat on a plastic chair, still holding the blue dress, while Rosa poured coffee into a mismatched cup. "Did you come from far away, ma'am?" Rosa asked in a low voice, after making sure they were alone. "From Scranton. An 8-hour bus ride," Helen replied, trying to smile. "I haven't seen my son in 3 years." Rosa nodded slowly, her eyes showing an understanding Helen hadn't found in Isabella. There was something in the housekeeper's gaze, a silent complicity that made her feel she might not be completely alone in this imposing, cold house. The hours dragged on. Through the window, Helen watched the house's activity: gardeners trimming shrubs, a head housekeeper supervising the window cleaning, delivery boys bringing expensive floral arrangements. Everything ran like a Swiss watch, efficient and soulless. As the sun began to set, she finally heard hurried footsteps in the hallway. Her heart leaped. Richard appeared at the door, taller than she, remembered, wearing an impeccable suit, but with the same face she had kissed goodnight every night of his childhood. For a moment, at 43, he was still her little boy. "Mom," he said, genuinely surprised. "What are you doing here? How did you get here? Why didn't you tell me you were coming?" The questions tumbled out, and Helen noticed something disturbing. Richard truly seemed unaware of her arrival, as if Isabella hadn't mentioned her presence during all those hours. I wanted to surprise you," she managed to say, standing up to hug him. The hug was brief, awkward. Richard looked over her shoulder, as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. "Mom, you shouldn't have come without calling. I have important commitments this week, crucial meetings for the company. I brought a gift for you," she said, holding out the blue dress. "And for your wife. I sewed it with so much love." Richard looked at the fabric, and something in his expression changed. For an instant, he seemed like the boy who used to run through their small house, who begged her to tell him stories before bed. But the moment passed quickly as Isabella appeared, at the door. "Richard, honey, is your mother okay? I noticed she seemed a bit confused today. Maybe the trip was too tiring," Isabella said, positioning herself strategically beside her husband. "Rosa mentioned she's been repeating some stories. Isn't that right, Rosa?" Rosa, who had just appeared with a tea tray, hesitated visibly before giving an almost imperceptible nod. Helen felt the world spin, confused, repeating stories. What was happening? "Richard, I need to speak with you," Isabella said, pulling her husband by the arm with apparent gentleness, but real firmness. "In private." Helen watched them walk away, whispering in the hallway. Their words came in fragments, but it was enough to make her blood run cold. "Didn't say she was coming. Strange behavior. Maybe it's best. A doctor." Rosa moved silently around the break room, arranging the few objects on the table. Helen realized the housekeeper was deliberately making less noise, as if trying to overhear the conversation in the hall. "Has she always been like this?" Rosa murmured, pretending to organize the cups. "Who?" Helen asked, still dizzy from what she had just witnessed. "The missus, always controlling everything that happens in this house." Before Helen could answer, Richard returned alone. His face was tense and he avoided his mother's direct gaze. He sat in the chair across from her but kept his distance, as if conducting a business meeting. "Mom, Isabella is worried about you. She said you seemed a little disoriented today." "Disoriented," Helen repeated, incredulous. "Richard, I traveled for 8 hours to see you. I'm perfectly fine. But you brought a wedding dress. We've been married for 2 years. You were at the wedding, remember?" The words hit Helen like a punch to the gut. She gripped the arms of the chair, trying to process what she was hearing. "Richard, I never got an invitation. I never knew about any wedding." "Mom," his voice became condescending, painfully paternal. "You were there. You wore a beige dress that the lady at the department store helped you pick out. We talked about it on the phone several times." Helen felt the floor disappear from under her. She remembered every single phone call from the past 3 years perfectly. Richard had never mentioned a wedding, never spoken of invitations, never described a ceremony. How could she have been at an event she didn't know existed? Son, I swear on everything holy that I never knew about your wedding. Please, you have to believe me. Richard sighed deeply, running his hands through his hair nervously. Mum, maybe it's best if you get some rest. It was a long trip. Sometimes exhaustion can... Can what? Helen's voice came out louder than she intended. Can cause temporary mental confusion. It's normal at your age. At your age. The same words Isabella had used. Helen realized she was being backed into a corner, painted as a senile old woman who either invented memories or lost them to suit others' convenience. I've prepared the guest room for you, Richard continued, clearly uncomfortable. You can stay for a few days until we figure things out, until you feel better. Until we figure things out. What did that mean exactly? Richard, please look me in the eye. I'm your mother. I raised you by myself after your father left us. I worked 2 jobs to pay for your education. Remember when you had pneumonia at 10 and I slept at the hospital for 3 nights straight? Remember your failing grades in math and how we studied together until you passed? Is that mental confusion? For a moment, something flickered in Richard's eyes. A shadow of recognition, of doubt about the narrative being built around him. But Isabella reappeared at that precise moment, as if she had perfect timing to interrupt any connection between mother and son. Honey, I called Dr. Evans. He can see your mother tomorrow morning just for a general evaluation. Nothing serious, just to make sure she's okay, Isabella said, stroking Richard's arm possessively. It's important to take care of our loved one's health, isn't it? Helen felt a chill run down her spine. Dr. Evans? What kind of doctor? And why schedule an appointment without even asking her opinion? I don't need a doctor, she said firmly. I'm perfectly fine. Of course you are, Mom. Isabella smiled, but again, the smile didn't reach her eyes. It's just a precaution, a routine checkup. Mom. The word sounded forced, artificial, as if Isabella were rehearsing a role in a play. Richard remained silent, clearly torn between the 2 versions of reality being presented to him. Helen realized she was losing ground fast, being isolated and questioned with every word she spoke. Rosa, Isabella called, can you show Helen to the guest room and make sure she has everything she needs for a comfortable night? Rosa nodded and gestured for Helen to follow her. As they passed through the main hallway, Helen could finally see the mansion's grandeur. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, expensive paintings adorned the marble walls, and the scent of fresh flowers perfumed the air. It was a world completely different from the simple house where Richard had grown up. The guest room was larger than the entire living room of her house in Scranton. Helen sat on the king-size bed, feeling small and lost among silk pillows and imported quilts. Would you like me to put your things in the closet, Ma'am? Rosa asked, indicating the fiberboard suitcase. No, thank you. I won't be staying long, Helen replied, stroking the blue dress she still held. Rosa hesitated at the door, glancing quickly to either side before approaching. Can I tell you something, Ma'am? Helen nodded. I've worked here for 2 years, since before their wedding. I've never seen you before today, Rosa whispered. And I handle all the mail that comes in. There was never a wedding invitation sent in your name. Helen's heart pounded. Finally, someone was confirming her sanity. Are you sure? Absolutely. I addressed all the invitations myself. There was a specific list, and your name wasn't on it. But why would Richard say that? Because he believes what the missus tells him, Rosa interrupted gently. Mrs. Isabella is very convincing, and Mr. Richard spends so much time at work that she ends up controlling all the information that gets to him. The revelation hit Helen like a cold wave. Isabella wasn't just being rude or prejudiced. She was deliberately constructing an alternate reality, manipulating Richard's memories and perceptions to isolate his mother. What else has she told him about me? Helen asked, afraid of the answer. Rosa glanced at the door again, making sure they were alone. That you always call in a confused state, repeating the same stories. That you forget appointments you make. That you've been talking to yourself around town and that the neighbors are worried. Every word was a stab. Helen had never experienced anything like this feeling of having her reality questioned and twisted by someone she barely knew. None of that is true, she whispered. I know, Rosa said with conviction. You're lucid and coherent, more coherent than a lot of rich people I know. A noise in the hallway made them fall silent immediately. Footsteps were approaching. Rosa quickly resumed her role as an efficient housekeeper, straightening the towels in the bathroom. Isabella appeared at the door, checking to see if everything was in order. Her eyes fixed on the blue dress Helen was still holding. Helen, why don't you put that dress in the closet? Leaving clothes lying around isn't very hygienic. I wanted to show it to Richard properly. It has special embroidery I did with him in mind. How sweet, Isabella said again, but Richard is very busy right now. Maybe tomorrow after the doctor's appointment you two will have time to chat about crafts. Crafts, as if the dress were an insignificant hobby of a bored old woman, and not months of careful work, every stitch filled with love and hope. For now it's best to rest. Dr. Evans likes his patients to be well rested for the evaluation. Evaluation. The word echoed ominously in Helen's mind. What kind of evaluation? And why did she feel her freedom depended on its outcome? After Isabella left, Rosa quickly returned to the room. Ma'am, I need to tell you something. Dr. Evans is a psychiatrist. He specializes in mental disorders in the elderly. Helen's blood ran cold. A psychiatrist. Isabella wasn't just questioning her memory. She was laying the groundwork to have her declared mentally incompetent. And there's more, Rosa continued in a low voice. I heard her on the phone today. She mentioned something about conservatorship papers and a retirement home. The final revelation was like a lightning strike. Conservatorship meant losing all her legal rights, being declared incapable of making decisions about her own life. A retirement home meant being separated from Richard forever. Helen realized she wasn't just fighting to reconnect with her son, she was fighting for her very freedom. Dawn arrived, and Helen hadn't slept a wink. Every noise in the house startled her. Every shadow in the room seemed like a threat. At 5 in the morning, she gave up trying to rest and got up to watch the garden from the window. The property was even more imposing in the soft morning light, but all that beauty now seemed like a gilded cage. A discreet movement caught her attention. Rosa was walking quickly across the back of the house, carrying something in her hands. A few minutes later, a soft knock on the door made her jump. "Ma'am, may I come in?" Rosa whispered. "Of course," Helen replied, opening the door. Rosa entered carrying a tray with fresh coffee and homemade rolls, but her face was tense. "I brought your breakfast, but I also need to tell you something important." They sat together in the armchair near the window. Rosa looked cautiously at the door before speaking. "Last night, after you were asleep, the missus was on the phone late. I overheard part of the conversation when I went to tidy up the office." "What did she say?" "She was talking to someone about speeding up the process. She mentioned you were more confused than they expected, and that it would be easier than they imagined." Rosa paused, clearly uncomfortable. "And there's more. She said Richard is starting to have doubts, so they need to act fast." Helen's heart raced. "Doubts about what?" "I'm not sure, but I heard her say you brought problematic evidence and that it could complicate the plans." Problematic evidence? Helen looked at her simple suitcase, trying to understand what could possibly be a threat. Besides, the blue dress and the cinnamon rolls, there were only her simple clothes and... "The letters!" she exclaimed in a low voice. "What letters?" "I brought some letters Richard sent me when he was a child, and photos of us together. I keep everything in a shoebox." Rosa leaned forward, interested. "Childhood letters?" "Yes. He used to write me little notes when he'd go stay with his aunt for the summer. I saved all of them. And I have photos from all his birthdays, graduations." Rosa nodded slowly. "The missus must have seen them when she went through your luggage?" "She went through my luggage?" "Ma'am, she goes through everything that comes into this house. And if you have proof of a normal childhood with Mr. Richard, that contradicts her narrative that you've always been troubled." The revelation was devastating. Isabella wasn't just making up stories about Helen's present. She was trying to rewrite her entire past with Richard, erasing decades of real memories to replace them with a convenient fiction. Rosa, I need to see those letters. Where is my suitcase? In the closet, but the missus had me lock it. She said it was to organize your things better. Helen stood up quickly and went to the built-in closet. The door was locked. She tried the dresser drawer where she had left a few things the night before. Also locked. She locked up my belongings. The missus said it was a security protocol to protect guests' valuables. Valuables. A shoebox with children's letters and faded photos. To Helen, they were priceless treasures. To Isabella, they were evidence to be destroyed. What time is the appointment? Helen asked, feeling time run out. At 10 o'clock, the missus is taking you personally. 3 hours. Helen had only 3 hours. To find a way to retrieve her proof before being subjected to a psychiatric evaluation that could lead to her forced institutionalization. Rosa, can you help me? The housekeeper hesitated, clearly torn between loyalty to her job and her sense of justice. What do you need me to do? I need to talk to Richard before the appointment, alone, without Isabella around. That's going to be difficult. He leaves for work at 7:30, but she always walks him to the gate to say goodbye. And after that? After that, she goes to the gym. She's there until 9:30. A plan began to form in Helen's mind. It was risky, but it might be her only chance. Rosa, do you know her routine at the gym? Pilates class and the jacuzzi. She's always there for exactly 2 hours. And where does Richard work? Downtown, the Miller construction office. It's about a 40-minute drive from here. Helen calculated quickly. If she could get out of the house between 8 and 9 in the morning, she could get to Richard's office around 9:30 before Isabella got back from the gym. She would have at least an hour to talk to her son away from his wife's influence. How can I get out of here? The missus told me to keep an eye on you. She said elderly people can get confused and wander off. Another piece of the manipulative puzzle. Isabella was turning Rosa into her warden, making her an unwilling accomplice in Helen's isolation. Rosa, do you really believe I'm confused? The housekeeper looked into Helen's eyes for a long moment. No, ma'am. You're the most lucid person I've met in this house. Then help me. Rosa was silent for several minutes, clearly fighting an internal battle. Finally, she sighed deeply. There's a service gate out back. It's used by vendors. At 9 o'clock, when the missus is at the gym, I can open it for you. And the office address? I'll write it down for you, but you have to be back before 10:30 or she'll notice. An hour and a half. Would it be enough? It would have to be. Rosa, one more thing. The keys to the closets where my things are. The missus keeps them all on her personal keychain. She's never without it. Helen nodded, frustrated but not defeated. First she would talk to Richard, then she would find a way to get her evidence back. At 7:15 they heard Richard's voice downstairs, talking to Isabella about his day's schedule. Helen stood near the door to listen. And your mother, honey? How did she seem to you yesterday? I don't know, Izzy. She seemed different, more fragile maybe. That's exactly what worries me. She's clearly losing her grip on reality. She insists on stories that don't make sense. But her memories of my childhood seem so detailed. Honey, people with early-stage dementia can remember the distant past while forgetting recent events. It's very common. That's why Dr. Heavens wants to do a full cognitive assessment. Cognitive assessment. The words echoed ominously in Helen's mind. She knew from experience, having cared for elderly neighbors, that psychiatric tests could be interpreted in very different ways depending on the evaluator's intent. Maybe I should cancel my meeting today and stay with her. No, my love. You have important responsibilities, and your presence might make her more agitated. It's better to let the professionals handle it. Let the professionals handle it. Translation: keep Richard away from his mother during the crucial evaluation. The footsteps faded, the garage door opened and closed, and Richard's car drove off. Helen watched from the window as Isabella saw him off, waiting until the car disappeared completely. Then she saw her daughter-in-law return to the house with a satisfied smile on her face. At 8:40, Isabella left for the gym in her white convertible. Rosa appeared in Helen's room exactly 5 minutes later. This is our chance, the housekeeper said, handing her a piece of paper with the address and a small hand-drawn map. The bus to downtown comes by the corner in 15 minutes. Helen quickly put on her most presentable outfit and followed Rosa through the service corridors to the back gate. The morning air was crisp, and for the first time in 24 hours, she felt free. "Remember," Rosa said as she opened the gate, "be back by 10:15. I'll be waiting here." Helen nodded and walked quickly toward the bus stop, carrying with her only the hope that Richard would listen, that, away from Isabella's influence, her son would remember who she really was. What she didn't know was that Isabella had installed security cameras on every gate of the property, and that at that very moment, her phone was vibrating with an automatic alert. Motion detected at the service exit. The office building rose imposingly in the city center, its mirrored windows reflecting the overcast morning sky. Helen took a deep breath before entering the elegant lobby, feeling out of place among executives in suits and women in high heels, rushing by with their leather briefcases. "Miller Construction, please," she said to the receptionist, trying to hide her nervousness. "15th floor, elevators to your right." The ride up seemed to take an eternity. Helen watched her reflection in the elevator's metallic doors. She was pale, with dark circles under her eyes, but her eyes still shone with the determination of someone fighting for their own survival. The construction company's reception area was all shades of grey and white, with strategically placed artificial plants. A young blonde woman in a uniform smiled professionally. "Good morning, how can I help you? I'd like to speak with Richard Miller. I'm his mother." The receptionist blinked several times, clearly surprised. "Mr. Miller didn't mention he was expecting family today." "It's a surprise," Helen said, forcing a smile. "Could he see me for a few minutes?" After a quick internal call, the young woman pointed to a waiting area. "He's just finishing a meeting. He should be with you in a moment." Helen sat in a leather armchair, watching the constant flow of employees. This was the world Richard had conquered, an empire built on his intelligence and determination, but which now seemed as distant from her as the moon. "Mum?" Richard's voice came from behind her, filled with surprise and concern. "How did you get here? Where's Isabella?" Helen stood up, noticing her son looking around as if expecting his wife to appear at any moment. "Richard, I need to talk to you. Alone. It's very important." He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, but eventually led her to his private office. The room was impressive. A mahogany desk dominated the space, shelves filled with architectural plans lined the walls, and a panoramic view of the city stretched out through floor-to-ceiling windows. "Mum, you shouldn't have left by yourself. Isabella was worried about your condition." "What condition, Richard?" Helen stood before his desk, planting her feet firmly on the floor. "Look at me, really look at me. Do I seem confused to you?" Richard watched her for a moment, and she could see the struggle in his eyes. The successful man fighting the little boy who once ran into her arms every time he got hurt. "Mom, you showed up at the house yesterday talking about a wedding dress you made for a wedding you'd already been to." "Richard," Helen interrupted, her voice trembling with restrained emotion, "I swear on your father's memory that I was never at your wedding. I never received an invitation. I never knew it was happening." "But that's impossible. We talked about it on the phone several times." "When? When exactly did we talk about it? Give me one date, one specific conversation." Richard opened his mouth to answer, but hesitated, his brow furrowed in concentration, as if trying to access a memory that stubbornly remained fuzzy. Isabella always handled those things. She said that you... She said. It's always, she said. Richard, when was the last time you and I talked directly, without Isabella being present or arranging the call? The silence that followed was telling. Richard ran his hands through his hair, a nervous habit Helen recognized from his childhood. "Mom, you're confusing me. I'm trying to save you." Helen stepped closer, placing her hands on her son's shoulders. "And save myself. Richard, Isabella scheduled a psychiatric appointment for me today. She wants to have me committed." "Committed? No, Mom. It's just a precautionary evaluation. An evaluation to declare me mentally incompetent, to get me out of your life for good." The words hit Richard like a bucket of cold water. He stepped away from Helen, walking to the window. "That's paranoia, Mom. Isabella is just concerned about your well-being. She locked up my belongings. She locked up the letters you wrote me as a child, the photos from all your birthdays. Why would she do that if she wasn't afraid of what they prove? What letters? The little notes you used to send when you go stay with Aunt Marissa for the summer. Remember? You'd draw little horses in the margins and always end with, "Mommy, I'll be home soon. I have them all saved." Something shifted in Richard's expression. A flicker of recognition passed through his eyes. I vaguely remember writing letters. And do you remember your 8th birthday party? When you said you didn't want a party because it was just the two of us, and I made a chocolate cake with yellow frosting because you said it looked like the sun. Richard turned slowly, his eyes filling with tears. "Sunshine cake," he whispered. "I called it my sunshine cake." "Yes, and you ate so much you got sick and slept in my bed. You said you were afraid of having nightmares about too much sugar." The walls Isabella had built were starting to crumble. Richard approached his mother, touching her face gently. "Why did I forget all of this?" "Because someone made you forget. Someone who has an interest in keeping me away from you." The desk phone rang, shattering the moment. Richard answered it automatically. "Hello?" Isabella's voice was loud enough for Helen to hear from across the desk. "Richard, where is your mother? I got home and Rosa said she left. I'm so worried. Disoriented elderly people can get lost or hurt themselves." Richard looked at Helen, who shook her head vehemently. She's here with me, Izzy." "There? How did she get there?" "Richard, this is very concerning. She shouldn't be wandering around the city alone. I'm coming to get you both right now." "You don't have to. Richard, don't argue. Your mother needs immediate medical attention. Dr. Evans can see her earlier if it's an emergency." The call ended abruptly. Helen felt panic rise in her chest. "Richard, did you hear that? She didn't even ask if I was okay. She didn't ask what I was doing here. She was only concerned with picking me up and taking me to the doctor. But she's worried. She's desperate to control me." Helen gripped her son's hands. "Richard, look me in the eye. I'm your mother. I know you better than anyone in this world. Remember when you were scared to ride your bike, and I ran alongside you for 2 weeks until you got the courage? Remember when you broke your arm playing soccer and I carried you on my back to the hospital?" Tears were now streaming freely down Richard's face. "I remember," he whispered. "How could I forget? Because you trusted someone who didn't deserve your trust." The sound of the elevator arriving on their floor alerted them. Hurried footsteps echoed in the hallway. "She's coming," Richard said, panicking. "Richard, listen to me." Helen cupped her son's face in her hands. "Don't let me go to that appointment, please. If you love me like I love you, don't let her take me from you." The door burst open. Isabella stormed in like a hurricane, her eyes flashing with barely contained rage, but the fake smile still plastered on her face. "Helen, you gave me such a scare. How did you manage to get here all by yourself?" "I took the bus," Helen answered with dignity. "I'm not an invalid." "Of course not, dear." Isabella's tone was condescending. "But people your age can get confused in traffic. You could have gotten lost or had an accident." "Isabella," Richard intervened, his voice firmer than before. "I was talking with my mother. She's perfectly oriented." Isabella's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Honey, you're not a doctor. Sometimes people with cognitive issues can seem lucid in superficial conversations. That's why we need a professional opinion." "And what if I don't want to see a doctor?" Helen asked directly. "Oh, but you will," Isabella said, her smile becoming sharper. "After all, only people with something to hide would refuse a simple medical evaluation. Isn't that right, Richard?" The trap was set. Any refusal would be interpreted as proof of guilt, of mental instability. Helen realized she was being pushed into a corner. "Very well," she said, lifting her chin. "I'll see the doctor, but I want Richard to come with me." "Impossible," Isabella replied quickly. "Richard has important meetings, and the presence of family can influence the evaluation's outcome. Dr. Evans prefers individual consultations." Helen looked at her son one last time, trying to convey the urgency of her situation with her eyes. Richard seemed to understand, because he took a step forward. "You know what? I'm cancelling my meetings. I want to go with my mother." Isabella's mask slipped for a fraction of a second. revealing an expression of pure fury before she composed herself. "How sweet, my love. But Dr. Evans was very clear about the procedure. Perhaps it's best we respect his professional experience." And then Helen saw something terrifying in Isabella's eyes. The appointment wasn't just for an evaluation. It was for something far more sinister. And Richard, even as he was starting to wake up to the truth, still didn't fully understand the danger she was in. Dr. Evans's office was in a sleek medical building with dark wood-paneled walls and a silence that seemed to suck all the hope out of the room. Helen sat in the leather armchair across from the psychiatrist, a man in his 50s with gold-rimmed glasses and a smile that inspired no confidence. Isabella had insisted on walking her to the waiting room, whispering instructions in the doctor's ear while Helen pretended not to notice. "It's exactly as we discussed on the phone, Doctor. The episodes are getting worse." Episodes? What episodes? Helen had never had any episodes, but apparently her life was being rewritten by someone who had never been a part of it. "Helen," Dr. Evans settled into his chair, flipping through some notes, "your daughter-in-law has told me about some family concerns. Let's just have a calm chat." "What kind of concerns?" "Issues with memory, temporal confusion, behaviors that might indicate the onset of cognitive decline." Helen took a deep breath. She knew every word would be analyzed, every hesitation interpreted as a symptom. "Doctor, I'm here because my daughter-in-law made this appointment, not because I have any memory problems." "I understand, but sometimes those close to us notice changes before we do. Tell me about your arrival at your son's house yesterday." The question seemed simple, but Helen saw the trap. If she told the truth about not being invited to the wedding, she would sound delusional. If she accepted Isabella's version, she would be admitting to mental confusion. "I went to visit my son. I brought gifts for him and his wife." "What kind of gifts?" "Cinnamon rolls he always liked, and a dress I sewed." "A dress for what occasion?" The moment of truth. Helen looked the doctor in the eye, deciding to bet on honesty. "For their wedding. But I found out they've been married for 2 years, and according to my daughter-in-law, I was at the ceremony." Dr. Evans jotted something down quickly. "And you remember being at the wedding?" "I don't remember because I was never there. I never got an invitation. I never knew it was happening." "But that would be a very important event in your son's life. How would you explain this memory lapse?" "It's not a memory lapse, Doctor. It's an event lapse. I was never at the wedding because I was never invited." The doctor shifted in his chair, making more notes. Helen realized her words were being interpreted exactly as Isabella had hoped, as the delusions of a mind that couldn't accept having forgotten something important. "Helen, I'm going to ask you a few simple cognitive questions. What day is it today?" "Wednesday, December 17th. "What year?" 2025. "Where are we?" "In your office downtown." "Very good. Now I'm going to say 3 words, and I want you to repeat them. House blue cat. House blue cat. Perfect. Tell me about your childhood." For 20 minutes, Helen answered questions about dates, places, people. Her memory was flawless, her accounts coherent and detailed. But she noticed the doctor was taking notes even when she got everything right. "Now, tell me about your relationship with your son over the last few years." "For the last 3 years, Richard has been more distant. The calls became less frequent. He said he was very busy with work and his marriage." "And did that bother you?" "Of course it bothered me. Any mother would be concerned." "How did you handle that concern?" Helen hesitated. The question seemed innocent, but she felt a trap forming. "I respected his space. Sometimes I'd call to see if he was okay." "How often?" "Once a week, maybe twice." The doctor wrote something that seemed lengthy. "Your daughter-in-law mentioned that sometimes these calls were repetitive." "Repetitive? How?" "You would tell the same stories over and over, ask the same questions." "That's a lie," Helen said firmly. "I was always careful not to bother my son." "Helen, sometimes people with early-stage dementia don't notice these behaviors. It's very common for the family to see it first." "Doctor, with all due respect, you're evaluating me based on what other people have said about me, not on what you're observing here. It's part of the process. Close family members are important sources of information. And what if those family members are lying? Dr. Evans stopped writing and looked at her intently. Why would your daughter-in-law lie about that? Because she wants to keep me away from my son. Does that seem like rational behavior on her part? The question was a perfect trap. If Helen insisted on her theory, she would sound paranoid. If she backed down, she would be admitting her perceptions were wrong. Doctor, can you tell me something? Who paid for this consultation? That's irrelevant to the evaluation. It's relevant to me. Does who's paying your bills influence your conclusions? Helen, I understand you're feeling pressured, but I need you to understand that I'm here to help you. Help me how? By declaring me mentally incompetent? The doctor sighed, taking off his glasses to clean them. No one has said anything about declaring incompetence, but if there has been significant cognitive deterioration, there are treatments that can help. And if there's been no deterioration at all, if I'm perfectly sane, then we have nothing to worry about. But the tone of his voice suggested the exact opposite. Helen realized the outcome of the consultation had been decided before she even walked into the room. Doctor, may I ask a question? If I were your mother, would you have her committed based solely on the testimony of a daughter-in-law who has known me for 2 years? Helen, no one has mentioned commitment. But that's what's being planned, isn't it? The doctor put his glasses back on, clearly uncomfortable. I'm going to end our conversation for today. I need to process the information I've gathered. When will I get the results? In a few days. Your daughter-in-law will be contacted with the recommendations. My daughter-in-law will be contacted, not me. The person being evaluated would be the last to know her own fate. And what if I disagree? With the recommendations? Helen, let's not worry prematurely. Finish the memory test first. Do you remember the 3 words I said at the beginning? House, blue, cat. Perfect. But his expression wasn't that of someone impressed by her perfect memory. It was that of someone with an agenda to follow. When she left the office, she found Isabella flipping through a magazine in the waiting room, but she noticed that not a single page had been turned during the entire consultation. She was just waiting, confident in the outcome. How did it go, dear? Isabella asked, standing up with false solicitude. It was enlightening, Helen replied. Dr. Evans is wonderful, isn't he? So thorough, so professional. On the way back, Isabella chattered happily about plans for the rest of the week, as if she were organizing a vacation, not deciding an elderly person's future. She casually mentioned a very nice care facility she had visited that morning. Just as a precaution, you understand, in case the doctor recommends a more structured environment. A more structured environment. The words echoed in Helen's mind like a prison sentence. She looked out the car window, watching the city go by, and wondered if this would be the last time she saw it as a free woman. When they arrived at the mansion, they found Richard waiting in the foyer. His face was tense, worried. How was the appointment? It was very productive, Isabella answered before Helen could speak. Dr. Evans will give us the diagnosis in a few days. And you? Richard looked at his mother. How did you feel? Helen opened her mouth to answer, but Isabella cut her off again. She got a little agitated during the exam. It's normal when there are cognitive issues. People with dementia sometimes become paranoid, believing they're being persecuted. Paranoid. The word was planted with surgical precision, preparing the ground to discredit anything Helen might say about the appointment. Mom, Richard insisted, what did you think of the doctor? Helen looked at her son, then at Isabella, realizing that every word would be used against her. I think he already had his mind made up before he even met me. See? Isabella sighed theatrically. That's exactly the kind of paranoid thinking the doctor mentioned. Desperation washed over Helen. Every truth she spoke was twisted into a symptom. Every protest became proof of her instability. She was being pushed into a labyrinth where all exits led to the same destination, the complete loss of her freedom and dignity. Rosa, Isabella called, could you take Helen to rest? She's had a very tiring day. Rosa appeared immediately, as if she had been waiting in the shadows. Her eyes met Helen's for a moment, and the housekeeper gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head. Something had happened while she was gone, something Rosa urgently needed to tell her. As she walked up the stairs with the housekeeper, Helen heard Isabella whispering to Richard, "The doctor said cases like this can deteriorate rapidly. Maybe we should start thinking about safer alternatives." Safer alternatives, the euphemism for a prison disguised as medical treatment. As soon as the bedroom door closed, Rosa approached Helen with obvious urgency. Her eyes were red, as if she had been crying, and her hands were trembling slightly. "Mom, I have to tell you what I found out today, but it's very serious." Helen sat on the edge of the bed, sensing that her situation was about to get drastically worse. "What happened, Rosa?" "After you left this morning, the missus came back from the gym early. She was furious. She yelled at me, said I'd been negligent for letting you escape. She yelled at you because of me." "Yes, but that's not the worst part." Rosa glanced nervously at the door. "She told me to pack up your room and gather all your things. She said you wouldn't be needing them anymore." Helen's blood ran cold. "What do you mean, wouldn't be needing them?" "Ma'am, I heard her on the phone with that facility. It wasn't a consultation call. It was a confirmation for admission. For tonight." "Tonight?" Helen stood up abruptly. "But the doctor said the results would be out in a few days." "The missus lied. Dr. Evans had already given his opinion before you even got to the office. I heard her thank him for the accurate diagnosis and confirm the immediate transfer for specialized treatment." Helen felt the world spin around her. The consultation had been a complete sham, a performance to give medical legitimacy to a pre-planned commitment. "Rosa, are you sure about what you heard?" "I am, ma'am, and there's more." Rosa moved even closer, whispering, "I managed to save some of your things before she destroyed them." "What things?" Rosa pulled a small yellowed envelope from her apron. "Some of the letters Mr. Richard wrote as a child. The missus was burning them in the backyard, but I managed to save these." Helen took the letters with trembling hands. It was indeed Richard's childish handwriting, with drawings in the margins and that characteristic sign-off. "Mommy, I'll be home soon." Tears rolled down her face. "Rosa, thank you, but she'll notice they're gone." She already has. When she got back from the gym and saw that some letters had survived the fire, she was hysterical. She accused me of tampering with your private documents. Private documents? She's trying to erase my history with Richard. Exactly, and she had the nerve to say it was to protect you from memories that might confuse you further. Rosa paused, clearly fighting her emotions. "Ma'am, I have a family to support. 3 small children. If I lose this job—" "Rosa, I don't want you to get in trouble because of me." "You don't understand." Rosa wiped her eyes with her apron. "My mother went through the same thing you're going through. My stepfather convinced the doctors she was going senile, so he would get her house. She spent the last 2 years of her life in a facility, medicated, forgotten. I was too young to understand at the time, but now—" The revelation explained Rosa's determination to help. She wasn't just being sympathetic. She was reliving a personal trauma. "What happened to your mother?" "She passed away far from her family, medicated until she didn't recognize anyone. By the time we found out the truth, it was too late. She was already gone." Helen squeezed the housekeeper's hand firmly. "That's not going to happen to me. We won't let it." "But how?" "Ma'am, the ambulance has already been called. It's coming at 8 tonight. The missus told Mr. Richard it was a voluntary admission for a more detailed evaluation. At 8 tonight. Helen looked at the clock. It was 5:30. 2.5 hours to find a solution or lose her freedom forever. Does Richard know about this? The missus is telling him right now, saying the doctor recommended it be done urgently because your paranoia was getting dangerously worse. Paranoia. The word Isabella had strategically planted all afternoon was now being used to justify a forced commitment. "Rosa, I need to talk to Richard before they come for me." "That will be difficult, ma'am. The missus won't leave you two alone for a single minute." Helen thought quickly. She needed something that would force Richard to question Isabella's version, something that would prove unequivocally that he was being manipulated. "Rosa, my blue dress, where is it?" "The missus had it put in the basement storage. She said it was contaminated with a musty smell, and needed to be treated before anyone could touch it. Contaminated. Isabella couldn't even hide her disgust for Helen's humble origins. "Can you take me there? It's risky. If the missus finds out—" "Rosa, that dress is my last chance. There's something embroidered on the lining that only Richard will recognize." Rosa hesitated for a moment, then nodded with determination. "Let's go now, while she's distracted with him." They left the room silently, walking through the service corridors until they reached the mansion's basement. It was a large, climate-controlled space where seasonal items and rarely used belongings were stored. The blue dress was hanging in a dark corner, isolated from everything else as if it were contagious. Helen touched it fondly, remembering the nights she had spent lovingly embroidering every detail. "What do you want to show, Mr. Richard?" Helen turned the dress inside out, revealing the inner lining. Embroidered with almost invisible gold thread was the name Richard, followed by a date, 3/15/1982. What does that date mean? "The day Richard first told me he loved me. He was 5 years old, had broken a vase while playing, and was scared he'd be punished. When I comforted him instead of scolding him, he hugged me and said, 'Mommy, I love you forever.'" Rosa looked at the delicate embroidery, touching the letters with reverence. "Did you embroider this recently?" "No. I embroidered it 3 years ago when I started making the dress. I always dreamed of giving it to him at his wedding." "So this is proof that you always knew he was going to get married, that there was no mental confusion." "Exactly. And it also proves I was never at the wedding, because if I had been, I would have given him the dress then." Footsteps echoed above them. Rosa grabbed Helen's arm. "Someone's coming." Quickly, Rosa helped Helen hide the dress under her blouse, and they went up in the service elevator. When they reached the main floor, they found Isabella pacing nervously, looking for something. "Rosa, where were you?" "Getting a headache pill for Helen, Mom." Isabella eyed Rosa suspiciously, then turned to Helen. "How are you feeling, dear? Richard is very worried about you." "Where is he?" "Making some important calls, cancelling appointments to be near you during this difficult time." Difficult time, as if the commitment were a passing cold. "Isabella, may I ask you a question?" "Of course, dear." "Why are you so afraid of me?" The question caught Isabella off guard. For a moment, her mask of solicitude faltered, revealing something much darker underneath. "Afraid? I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just concerned for your well-being." "If you're concerned for my well-being, why did you burn my letters? Why did you lock up my things? Why did you schedule a doctor's appointment without my knowledge?" "Helen, these accusations are exactly the kind of paranoia the doctor—" "It's not paranoia if it's true." Isabella took a deep breath, clearly struggling to maintain her composure. "Richard," she called toward the office, "could you come here, please? Your mother is having another episode." Another episode. Helen realized that every conversation, every question she asked was being twisted into a symptom of mental illness. Richard appeared quickly, his face etched with concern. "What is it, Mom?" "Richard, I need to show you something important." "Honey," Isabella intervened immediately, "perhaps it's best not to encourage her delusions. The doctor said the more attention we give to these fantasies, the more they intensify." "They're not fantasies," Helen exclaimed, pulling the dress out from under her blouse. "Look at this, Richard. Really look." She unfolded the dress in front of her son, showing him the delicate embroidery, the small, exquisitely stitched flowers, the blue fabric that shimmered softly under the chandelier's light. "It's beautiful, Mom," Richard said, but his voice sounded distant, as if he were talking to a child. "No, Richard. Look at the lining, please." Helen turned the dress over, revealing the golden embroidery with his name and the date. Richard moved closer, frowning. "What's this date?" "March 15th, 1982. The day you told me you loved me forever. Remember?" Something changed in Richard's expression. He touched the embroidered letters, his eyes filling with an emotion that Isabella immediately recognized as dangerous. I vaguely remember." "Of course you remember." Helen took her son's hands. You were scared you had broken my favorite vase, the blue one with white flowers that belonged to your grandmother. Grandma Helen's vase, Richard whispered. Yes, and I told you that vases break, but a mother's love never does. Tears began to stream down Richard's face. The memory was coming back, sharp and real, tearing down the walls Isabella had built. Mom, how do you remember all of this in such detail? Because they are the most important memories of my life, son. Isabella watched the scene with growing horror. Her strategy was unraveling before her eyes. It was time for a desperate move. Richard, she said, her voice taking on a tone of urgency. The doctor warned us this might happen. People with advanced dementia can have episodes of apparent clarity that are actually very vivid hallucinations. They mix real memories with fantasies, creating narratives that seem convincing. But she remembers details I had forgotten myself. Exactly. That's a symptom of a very serious condition. Dr. Evans said that when they reach this stage, they can become a danger to themselves and others. A danger. The final word in Isabella's strategy. Helen wasn't just confused. She was a threat. The doorbell rang through the house. Isabella glanced at the clock with satisfaction. The ambulance is here. The sound of the doorbell cut through the air like a blade. Helen felt her legs weaken, but she stood her ground, clutching the blue dress to her chest like a shield. Richard looked back and forth between his mother and Isabella, clearly trying to process everything that was happening. "What ambulance?" he asked, his voice filled with surprise. "The one we talked about, honey," Isabella replied with forced casualness. "To take your mother for the more detailed evaluation. Remember Dr. Evans recommended 24-hour observation? But I thought that would only be if it was necessary. Mom, do you agree to this?" Helen looked into her son's eyes, seeing the genuine confusion there. Richard truly didn't know the commitment had been planned before the doctor's appointment even took place. "Richard, I never agreed to any kind of commitment. This is the first I'm hearing of it." "Honey," Isabella moved closer to Richard, touching his arm possessively. "We talked about this afternoon. You were worried about her paranoid episodes and agreed it would be for the best. I don't remember agreeing to have her committed." "You were very stressed, my love. It's understandable you don't remember every detail." The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. Footsteps approached the door. "Mrs. Miller," a man's voice called from outside. "We're from the St. Benedict's clinic. We're here to pick up the patient." Patient. Helen felt a chill run down her spine. She wasn't a patient. She was a prisoner being transferred. "We'll be right there," Isabella shouted toward the door, then turned to Richard. "Honey, maybe it's best if you say goodbye to your mother now. These procedures can be traumatic for the family." "Say goodbye?" Richard frowned. "I thought it was just an evaluation for a few days." "Well, depending on what they find, she might need to stay longer. Advanced cases of dementia require long-term treatment." Rosa appeared silently in the hallway, carrying a small suitcase. Helen realized her clothes had already been packed, as if her departure were a foregone conclusion. "Wait," Richard said, positioning himself between Helen and the door. "I want to talk to these medics first. I want to understand exactly what the procedure is." "Richard, don't be so dramatic," Isabella laughed, nervously. "They're qualified professionals. They know what they're doing. Even so, I want to talk to them." Richard walked to the front door, followed by Isabella, who was trying to dissuade him. Helen seized the moment to approach Rosa. "The letters you saved, where are they?" "In my pocket," Rosa whispered. "But if the missus finds out—" "Rosa, I need you to do something very important. When I leave here, find a way to show those letters to Richard. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but when Isabella isn't around." "What if she fires me?" "If they commit me, it won't matter anyway. But if you can get those letters to Richard, maybe he'll finally understand the truth." Voices rose in the foyer. Richard was questioning the paramedics about the procedures, while Isabella tried to rush them. "My mother doesn't seem to be in acute crisis," Richard was saying. "Maybe this is premature." "Mr. Miller," one of the paramedics replied, "we have a doctor's order for immediate admission. Dr. Evans was specific about the urgency of the case." but she's calm, talking normally. Sir, people with dementia can have moments of apparent lucidity. That's precisely why professional observation is needed. Helen approached the group, still holding the blue dress. The paramedics were two middle-aged men in clean uniforms carrying a medical bag. "Please," she said calmly, "may I know exactly what Dr. Evans's diagnosis was?" One of the paramedics consulted a clipboard. "Senile dementia with paranoid episodes and erratic behavior. Recommendation for admission for a full neuropsychiatric evaluation." "When was this diagnosis made?" "This morning, ma'am." This morning. Before the appointment had even happened. Helen looked at Richard, hoping he would catch the temporal impossibility. How could it have been this morning if I only saw the doctor this afternoon? The paramedics exchanged confused glances. One of them checked the paperwork again. "Sir," he said to Richard, "is there a discrepancy in the information we received?" Isabella interjected quickly. "There was a phone consultation this morning, based on the family's report. The in-person appointment was just a confirmation." "What family report?" Richard asked. "The information I gave the doctor about your mother's behavior over the last few weeks." "But you only met her yesterday." The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella realized she had seriously contradicted herself. I based it on your descriptions of her behavior over the phone." "What? Descriptions? I never described any strange behavior from my mother to you." Richard was starting to connect the dots, and Isabella panicked. "Richard, you're confused. The stress of the situation is affecting your memory too." "My memory is perfectly fine," Richard exploded. "And I'm starting to remember a lot of things now, like how you always changed the subject when I mentioned my mother, how you said she'd called several times when I never got those calls, how you always scheduled our social life on the weekends I could have visited her." The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place in Richard's mind. Helen watched her son awaken to the reality that had been carefully hidden from him. "Gentlemen," one of the paramedics addressed Richard, "there's a lot of confusion here. Perhaps it would be best to call Dr. Evans to clarify the situation." "No," Isabella said quickly. "He's in surgery. That's why he asked you to proceed directly with the admission." "Then we'll wait until he can speak with us," Richard said firmly. "Richard, every minute we waste could be crucial for your mother's treatment." "If it's so crucial, why does she seem completely lucid right now?" Helen realized this was her chance. She approached Richard and showed him the lining of the dress again. "Son, look at the date. When did I embroider this?" Richard examined the embroidery carefully. "The thread is still new. This was done recently." "Exactly. I made it 3 years ago when I heard you were dating someone. I always dreamed of giving you this dress at your wedding." "3 years ago?" Richard repeated slowly. "If I've had memory problems for years, as you said the doctor diagnosed, how could I have remembered to embroider your name and the exact date of such a specific memory?" The logic was irrefutable. Richard looked at Isabella, who was visibly desperate. "Izzy, explain this." "Richard, people with dementia can have moments of clarity. It's perfectly possible she embroidered this in a lucid moment and then forgot. But she remembers perfectly when and why she did it. She remembers the date, the meaning, all the details." Helen saw her opportunity and took it. "Richard, answer me something. In the last 3 years, how many times did you try to call me and I didn't answer?" "A few times. Isabella always said you were confused when you picked up." "And how many times did you call me directly without Isabella knowing?" Richard thought for a moment, then his face went pale. "Never. Isabella always arranged our calls." "Why? Why does a grown man need his wife to arrange calls with his own mother?" "Because she said you got agitated when I called unexpectedly." "Son, I never got agitated. I got happy. Every call from you was the best moment of my month." Tears began to stream down Richard's face. He looked at Isabella as if seeing her for the first time. "You lied to me." "Richard, you're letting yourself be manipulated by a sick person." "The only sick person here is you," Richard shouted. "You systematically separated me from my mother. You invented symptoms, manipulated situations, lied about conversations that never happened." "Richard, calm down." "No, I will not calm down. My mother has always been lucid, has always loved me, and I abandoned her because I believed your lies." The paramedics watched the argument with growing discomfort. "Mr. Miller," one of them intervened, "without a court order or the patient's consent, we cannot proceed with the admission." "And you do not have my consent," Helen said, firmly. "Nor mine," Richard added. Isabella looked around, realizing she was losing control of the situation. Her face twisted into an expression of pure rage that finally revealed her true nature. "You will regret this," she said, her voice low and threatening. "Richard, your mother will destroy everything we've built. She is an obstacle to our future." "Our future?" Richard asked. "What kind of future needs to be built on lies and cruelty?" Isabella realized she had gone too far. She tried to backtrack, but it was too late. I was just trying to protect our marriage." "Protect it? From what? From my mother's love?" Rosa, who had watched the entire scene in silence, approached Richard and discreetly handed him the letters she had saved. "Mr. Richard, your mother asked me to keep these for you." Richard took the yellowed letters, immediately recognizing his own childhood handwriting. He read one of them aloud. "Dear Mommy, Aunt Marissa made chocolate cake, but it's not as good as yours. I miss you. Mommy, I'll be home soon. Your little boy who loves you, Richard." Silence filled the room. Richard held the letters to his chest, then approached Helen and hugged her, for the first time in 3 years. "Mum, forgive me. Please forgive me for ever doubting you. There's nothing to forgive, my son. You were deceived by someone you trusted." Isabella watched the reunion with undisguised hatred. When she saw the paramedics packing up their equipment to leave, she made one last desperate attempt. "Richard, if you don't have your mother committed now, I will have to take more drastic measures to protect our family." "What measures?" The smile that crossed Isabella's face was cold and calculated. "There are other ways of dealing with people who threaten family harmony, and not all of them involve voluntary admissions." The veiled threat hung in the air like a dark cloud. Helen realized that even though she was exposed, Isabella still had cards up her sleeve. And Richard, despite having awakened to part of the truth, still didn't fully understand the kind of person he had married. The days that followed turned the mansion into a silent war zone. Isabella had locked herself in the master bedroom, emerging only for whispered phone calls with lawyers, while Richard had moved Helen into the main guest suite, personally taking over all of his mother's care. Rosa became a precious ally, gradually revealing other manipulative schemes she had witnessed over the 2 years. How Isabella intercepted mail, how she invented non-existent social engagements to keep Richard busy on weekends, how she had even hired a call-blocking service to prevent Helen from speaking directly with her son. "She planned it all from the beginning," Rosa said one morning, while serving Helen coffee on the patio. "The day after the wedding, she asked me about Mr. Richard's family. When I told her he talked about you a lot, that he missed you, she became visibly annoyed." Helen shook, her head, still processing the sheer scale of the manipulation. 2 years of systematic lies. And it would have continued if you hadn't come, if you hadn't brought the proof. Just then, Richard appeared on the patio, carrying a stack of documents. His face was tired, marked by guilt and the discovery of betrayals that went beyond what he had imagined. "Mom, I need to tell you something I found out yesterday." Helen braced herself for more painful revelations. "Isabella didn't just isolate me from you. She also manipulated our finances. She transferred large sums of money to her personal accounts, always with justifications that seemed reasonable at the time." "How much?" "Almost $2 million over 2 years. Investments that never existed, renovations that were never done, donations to charities she made up." Helen felt a mix of anger and relief. Anger at the extent of the betrayal, relief because now Richard had concrete legal grounds to separate from Isabella. "Does she know you found out?" "Not yet. I'm gathering all the evidence before I confront her. My lawyer said it's crucial to have complete documentation before starting the divorce proceedings." Divorce. The word Helen had dreamed of hearing, but which now brought little comfort in the face of all the suffering they had endured. "Richard, I don't want you to get a divorce because of me." "Mom, it's not because of you. It's because I discovered I married a person who doesn't exist. The woman I knew was a facade built to deceive me." Rosa, who was arranging flowers in the nearby garden, approached discreetly. "Mr. Richard, may I say something?" "Of course, Rosa." "The missus is packing her bags. I heard her on the phone talking about plane tickets." Richard frowned. "To where?" "I couldn't hear clearly, but she mentioned something about going abroad, and I heard her say she needed to finalize the last details before traveling." A chill ran down Helen's spine. Finalizing the last details could mean many things, including one last attempt to harm Richard or herself. "Richard, I think you should confront her today. I was planning to wait until I had all the documents. Son, if she's planning to flee, she could destroy evidence or do something worse before she leaves." Richard nodded, realizing the urgency of the situation. "You're right, I'll talk to her now." "I'm coming with you." "Mom, it could be dangerous. We don't know how she'll react when she feels cornered." "That's exactly why I need to be there. She already tried to have me committed once. I'm not leaving you alone with her again." They went up to the master bedroom together. The door was ajar and they could hear Isabella speaking softly on the phone. Richard knocked and entered without waiting for a response. Isabella was sitting on the bed, surrounded by expensive clothes and scattered jewelry, clearly selecting what to take. Upon seeing Richard with Helen, her face twisted into an expression of pure contempt. "Decided to pay me a little family visit?" "Isabella, we need to talk." "About what? About how you chose a senile old woman over your own wife? About the $2 million you embezzled from the company accounts?" The silence that followed was thick. Isabella stopped folding her clothes but maintained her composure. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I have all the bank statements, Izzy, all the transfers, all the false justifications. My accountant found everything." Isabella rose slowly, walking to the window. When she turned around, there was a cold smile on her face. "And what do you plan to do with that information?" "Return the money to the company and sue you for embezzlement." "Richard," Isabella's voice became syrupy, manipulative. "Do you really want to destroy everything we built together over some financial misunderstandings?" "They weren't misunderstandings, it was systematic theft. And you think your senile mommy is going to take better care of you than I did? She can't even remember if she was at our wedding." "She was never at our wedding because you never invited her," Richard exploded. "She remembers everything perfectly. You're the one who invented this dementia story." Isabella laughed bitterly. "Of course I invented it. It was the only way to get rid of her. Did you think I was going to share my husband with some country bumpkin?" The confession came out naturally, as if Isabella were relieved to finally be honest about her cruelty. "Why?" Helen asked softly. "Why so much hatred for someone you didn't even know?" "Because you represented everything I needed to erase from Richard's past. The humble origins, the simple values, the emotional attachment to things that don't matter. I was turning him into a real man and you were an obstacle." "Turning me into someone I'm not," Richard said, his voice heavy with sadness. "Making me abandon everything that had value in my life." "Value? What value is there in a 70-year-old woman who's never left the small town she was born in?" "The value of having loved me unconditionally for 43 years, Richard replied. "The value of having worked 2 jobs to pay for my education. The value of never having lied to me, not even once." Isabella snorted dismissively. "Cheap sentimentality. Is that what you called my love for you? Cheap sentimentality?" For the first time, something flickered in Isabella's face. "No, our love was different. It was sophisticated, mature. It was based on lies. You built a fake version of yourself to attract me, and then you tried to destroy everything that was real in my life." Helen watched the exchange with a broken heart. She saw her son finally understanding the difference between true love and sophisticated manipulation. "Isabella," she said gently, "it's not too late to change. You're young, smart, beautiful. You can find someone who truly loves you without having to lie or manipulate." Life advice from someone who spent her entire existence in a town of 5,000 people. Isabella laughed cruelly. "Thanks, but I'll pass." "Then leave," Richard said firmly. "Take what's yours and get out of my house." "Our house, which you bought with money you stole from my company. My lawyer is already arranging to have the property title reversed." Isabella's face finally showed real panic. "Richard, you're making a terrible mistake. Without me, you'll go back to being what you always were, an ordinary man from a humble background." "I hope so," Richard said, smiling for the first time in days. "I hope I go back to being Helen's son from Scranton." Isabella finished packing her bags in silence, occasionally shooting venomous glares at Helen. When she was ready to leave, she made one last attempt. "Richard, when you get tired of taking care of an old woman, when you realize you've wasted your life on sentimentality, remember that I offered you a real future." "A future based on lies isn't real," Richard replied. "It's just an expensive fantasy." Isabella left the house without looking back, taking only 2 suitcases and leaving behind 2 years of carefully constructed manipulations. In the months that followed, Richard and Helen's life found a new rhythm. He cut back on his work hours to spend more time with his mother, who decided to stay at the mansion until he felt emotionally recovered. Rosa was promoted to head housekeeper, taking over the complete management of the house with the care and efficiency she had shown during the crisis. Richard converted one of the rooms into a sewing studio for Helen, who went back to creating her handmade pieces, now with higher quality materials, but with the same love and dedication as always. The blue dress was framed and placed in the main living room, symbol of the victory of true love over manipulation and prejudice. One Sunday afternoon, 6 months after Isabella's departure, Richard and Helen were on the patio, she sewing a new creation while he read company reports. "Mom," he said, looking up from the papers. "Thank you." "For what, son?" "For not giving up on me, even when I had given up on you." Helen smiled, her eyes shining with happy tears. "Mothers never give up, Richard. That's what makes us mothers." She looked at the framed blue dress on the wall, remembering all the nights she had spent embroidering it, with hope in her heart. The hope had been worth it. "You know what makes me happiest," she said. "What?" "That you're calling me Mom again, not Ma'am or Helen." Richard laughed, getting up to hug her. "Of course, I'm your son. Always have been, always will be." And there in that long embrace on the mansion's patio, surrounded by the flowering garden and the gentle sound of the fountain, they recovered not only their bond, but also the certainty that true love, even when tested by manipulation and separation, always finds its way back. The blue dress had fulfilled its mission. It hadn't been worn at a wedding, but it had witnessed something even more precious, the reunion of a family that time, distance, and ambition had torn apart, but that unconditional love had managed to rebuild. Rosa, watching the scene from the kitchen window as she prepared dinner, smiled and whispered a small prayer of gratitude. Her own mother hadn't been so lucky, but seeing Helen and Richard together again somehow healed the wounds of her past. The sun set over the city, painting the sky in golden hues that reflected off the mansion's windows. And for the first time in 3 years, that grand house was truly filled with love and life. End of story. Hey everyone, we hope the story of Helen, Richard, and Isabella touched your heart. If you were moved by Helen's courage in fighting for her son and for the dignity of the family she built, hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and tell us in the comments what part of this story resonated with you the most. Every day, we bring you intense stories like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul, showing that true wealth lies in the bonds we build, in the courage to accept help, and in the generosity to pay it forward when it's our turn to lend a hand. We'll see you in the next episode with another narrative that will stir your emotions and make you reflect on the values that truly matter in life.